thumb too, a finger, an index finger. I can push enter just as easily as anybody else. So the answer was no effing way that I was going to give up literally the lion's share, 3/4 of ebook revenues. And yes, you well know, if you self-publish, big name, small name, it doesn't matter. Through Kindle Direct Publishing, Kobo Writing Life, or Smashwords, or a draft to digital, your share is 70%.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 145 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In this episode, I have an interview with Robert J. Sawyer. Called the Dean of Canadian Science Fiction by the Ottawa Citizen, and just about the best science fiction writer out there these days by the Denver Rocky Mountain News, Rob is one of only 8 writers in history and the only Canadian to win all 3 of the science fiction field's top honors for Best Novel of the Year. Rob, who holds honorary doctorates from the University of Winnipeg and Laurentian University, has taught writing at the University of Toronto, Ryerson University, Humber College, and the Banff Centre. Rob has had 24 novels published, is now a fully hybrid author, has had a television series, ABC's Flash Forward, produced based on one of his novels, has multiple TV and movie options in play, and is one of the most sought-after science fiction writers for radio, television, and podcasts. We talk about his latest novel and how he has fully tackled leveraging his IP with his latest novel, as well as some backlist and other projects. Now, I last interviewed Rob for this podcast way back in episode 4, which was January 6, 2018, when we talked about many things and plenty of strategies for optimizing your author brand. Rob has long been a mentor of mine. I've learned so many things about the industry from him, and I was impressed with how he takes young writers under his wing frequently, and he gave me support and help when I was first starting out. And so it was great that there came a time when I was actually helping Rob with digital. It was like this small way I could partially pay him back for all the great things he did for me. But I was excited to catch up with Rob on his latest novel release and just how much has changed in his publishing strategies in the past couple of years. And we talked to him about all the ways that he's leveraging his IP and various rights to his writing. But that's coming up later in this episode. First, I'm going to share some comments from recent episodes. So recent comments came in from episode 144, 10 Tips for Winning with Wide Publishing. Georgia Rose shares this comment: "My books are wide, and I'm nowhere near as ferocious as Erin is in her top tips. There's plenty to take away and learn from there." Also, Georgia says, "Thanks for the update on the Findaway Voices codes. I hadn't heard that, so I can spread the word to my mailing list and hopefully get a few more takers for the codes." Awesome, Georgia. So glad that came in handy. It's funny, I thought it was old news, but I thought, in the Findaway Voices update, why not share some things that people might not have caught? Because, the new thing is the thing you hadn't yet heard. So glad that was helpful for you, and thanks for sharing that comment. MZ Lowe said, "Love the idea of the book," I was talking about the book Wide for the Wind, and adding it to the list. One that I didn't know the answer to, but would make for an interesting chapter and potentially podcast, is making your EPUB files accessible. In brackets, EPUB 2 is totally not accessible, while EPUB 3 still needs additional work, especially the metadata stuff, and Mobi files aren't much better. Seems like Vellum and most free converters vary greatly on this aspect. As a start, MZ leaves a link to accessiblebooksconsortium.org. There's actually a further link you'll find at the show notes there in the comments, which is obviously a helpful guide about accessible books. MZ goes on to our MZ, I'm going to say it the Canadian way, also goes on to say, in taking wide for the win to include everything possible to be inclusive, then promoting to libraries for the underserved and prioritizing accessibility tuck right into the book's premise. But it would also mean making changes to your website and newsletter emails to make them accessible too. But imagine a whole new market to serve. Would love for indies to blaze the trail since most trad publishers ignore accessible ebooks. That is such a valuable thing. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm going to try and do a deeper dive on accessible books, maybe see if there's somebody from Accessible Book Consortium to talk about that, and definitely will want to make sure that I include that in the book. So thank you so much for sharing that. And the same episode, Maddie Dalrymple comments, great episode, as always. My books have always been wide, and I've joined the Wide for the Win Facebook group to learn what I can start doing on wide platforms to continue expanding my presence there. For me, this will be more helpful than a focus on what to stop doing with or through Amazon. Amazon is an integral part of my business strategy, and so I prefer an approach that spreads the love around to all platforms rather than trying to cut out Amazon. I agree with you on that, Maddie. In my version of Wide for the Win is not about cutting out Amazon. It's about including everyone, including Amazon, because they are a big part of the industry. So that's my version of Wide, unlike the Facebook group, which the Facebook group, admittedly, is about everyone but Amazon, because 99% of everything else out there is about Amazon. So it's like, if you want Amazon, just look everywhere else. Whereas the book Wide for the Win has to, in my mind, include Amazon because it's part of the wide strategy. Just one part of it, not the entire part of it, like many other strategies people have. Maddie goes on to say, I also loved hearing about the progress on the werewolf books. Congratulations. Thank you, Maddie. Maddie says, I'd love in an upcoming episode to hear about the process of setting up a hardcover on Ingramspark and your assessment of the quality of the physical books. Well, Maddie, as we write this, I finally, after multiple iterations of a case cloth cover, I finally got back the digital proof, and I'll be doing that after I finish recording this episode. But I have to say, it was not the droids I was looking for. It was not as easy as I thought, and I'll get into that in more detail. It was not as happy an experience or as hot a party as I had hoped it would be. And on episode 143, Unstoppable Goals with HB Line, Georgia Rose commented and said, Hi, Mark. I finally caught up on all your podcasts since you dropped off my iTunes list sometime in the summer of 2019. It was weird to be listening to so many episodes just before the pandemic hit. Such innocent times where we were all just trundling along blissfully unaware of what was coming. Oh my God. Georgia, I'm so sorry that you and so many others who probably still haven't discovered that this podcast is still going ended up getting dropped with a weird change that happened. Maybe it was something I did when I was trying to fix a feed for iTunes based on category changes. And that was August of 2019. And I lost a whole bunch of faithful listeners, and it's so awesome to have you back. So welcome back, my prodigal daughter. Anyways, Georgia goes on to say, anyway, I do need to get more focused with going goal setting. So this episode was great to listen to. And that's the episode with Holly on goal setting. And Georgia says, I'm hoping to get the first drafts of 2 books completed by the end of the year. And the only way I will do that is by being considerably more goal-oriented. Thanks for all your great work, as always. And I'm so pleased to be finally caught up. Georgia, I'm so pleased that you're caught up. And Georgia, thank you for commenting on episode 143 and 144. Just a reminder that you have until the end of the day on Friday, July 31st, 2020. That'd be midnight Eastern Standard Time to leave a comment on episode 143 about goals and plans based on Holly's topic. And you can be entered, like Georgia has just been added to, chance for a random draw to receive a copy of her book on goal setting for writers, which releases on Friday, July 31st, which is the day that this podcast is being released. That book will be ordered through your favorite local bookstore or however you want to get it. And that'll be the format of your choice. So if it's a print book, for example, I can order it to drop ship from an online bookstore. I can order it from a local bookstore that you can pick up or do curbside pickup or delivery or however that works. We want to be able to support indie authors, support you as awesome listeners of the show, as well as support those other businesses and other bookstores, indie bookstores and chain bookstores, etc. Just want to spread the love as much as we can. And just a reminder that all patrons of the show are automatically entered in a chance to win that second copy of the book just by being patrons. And you can learn about how to do that over at patreon.com/starkreflections. Get access to additional content as well as cool prizes and opportunities like this one, which are meant to be surprises for patrons. So if you want to leave a comment for any episode of the show, love to hear your comments over at starkreflections.ca. And now, a word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices offers authors and small publishers the ability to get their audiobooks out into the broadest retailer and library distribution system out there, including access into Chirp, which is run by BookBub. Now, I'm going to share a word about Findaway Voices related to something that I've done recently, and this is sort of an idea or a trick that you can use. Now, this is an idea or a tip that you can use for promoting your audiobook, so why not share that on behalf of Findaway Voices? So I have just launched the audiobooks for This Time Around, A Canadian Werewolf in New York, and the forthcoming release, Stowaway, August 18th, 2020, that is coming out. So I'm basically, I've had This Time Around out for a little while, but I'm sort of relaunching the branding of the cover, relaunching that. I'm going to be doing some price promos on that in the week prior to the release of Stowaway. And I'm doing some audio promotions as well. So I did a video trailer with the audio from that, which is going to link back to the print book and the audiobook, as well as using headliner.app, which I learned about from Findaway Voices, where you can take small snippets of audio, whether it's from a podcast like this, whether it's from your audiobook, or whether it's just whatever it is that's an audio format, and you can share that through social media. And there's some really, really great tools where it shows the waveform, can do transposition of the titles, and again, just a different way to get your audiobooks out there. So I've used Headliner to share a 30-second clip of Scott Overton reading, Michael Andrews' voice for the Canadian Werewolf series for This Time Around, and in particular for this promo. I did the short Headliner, and then I also did a short video that I shared to YouTube, so I'll be sharing that on the show notes. So there's just the approach to promoting audiobooks is going to be a little bit different than ebooks. And you can find more tips like that over at Findaway Voices. They have a blog as well, and you can learn more about Findaway Voices and how you can use them as an author over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway.
This time I woke to find myself sprawled naked in the grass, my shoulder nestled in a shrub, and the coppery aftertaste of blood in my mouth. I pulled my aching body into a sitting position and checked it over for injuries. There was a nasty-looking wound in my thigh. It hurt like it was no more than a bad bruise, but it looked like a bullet hole. So to sum up my situation, there was a distinct taste of blood in my mouth and a bullet wound in my leg. What the hell had I done this time?
And that was just the first 30 seconds of the video that I did for the trailer for This Time Around. That was the voice of Scott Overton. And the music, of course, is by the awesome Kevin MacLeod, who does the music for this podcast as well. And all those credits are there. And you can, if you wanted to watch the short video clip, you can do that over at starkreflections.ca. Okay, now for a brief personal update. As I mentioned in the Findaway Voices update, I've got the audiobooks up for This Time Around, Canadian Werewolf in New York, and Stowaway. Been hard at work at that. Started working on Lover's Moon, which is going to be a romance short story of how Michael and Gail meet prior to A Canadian Werewolf in New York. And I'm working on that simultaneously with working on Fear and Longing in Los Angeles, which I've put up for pre-order to come out in February of 2021. So I'm kind of committing to that. The other thing I did that I put up for pre-order was I put up Wide for the Win. I put a pre-order up at bookstoread.com/wideforthewin, and I'm using Draft to Digital to publish it to all platforms because of the royalty sharing that is available for print and ebooks there, or that will be available. Sorry, it is not available yet, but it will be available prior to the go live, probably by this fall if I had to give it an educated, hopeful guess. And that's because I am sharing proceeds with Aaron Wright and Susie, who are the admins for the Wide for the Win Facebook group as well. So that's really, really exciting. So I'm kind of committing myself to deadlines and working desperately on that. I've already collected information and even actually have a forthcoming guest to talk about he has leveraged Kickstarter, yes, as a wide strategy. So you, awesome listeners to this podcast, are going to get sneak peeks and insights, kind of like you did with the Author's Guide to Working with Bookstores and Libraries. You may as well get some of this access first. Why not? Because you're awesome listeners, and I owe you that, don't I? So you'll have some sneak peeks into much of the content as I compile that over the next several months. Also just scheduled some amazing guests. I'm so looking forward to sharing that with you. It's been really, really busy in terms of writing, and I'm feeling a little bit better about actually getting stuff accomplished, actually finishing off projects. And I guess it's those little small things, those little small victories are fueling me to move forward. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you're feeling the way I had been for months, which is stifled and stuff, if you're a longtime listener, Liz and I did some parody videos and parody songs, and I did some short parody movie trailers and things like that. And the satisfaction of the start and finish on a smaller project really helped me. Maybe it's a short story, maybe it's a character sketch, maybe it's just going back and redoing one small thing. Like maybe you wanted to update your end matter in a backlist title or whatever it was, or update the blurb or something. At least if you can give yourself that small victory. And the small victory, that small win, that small completion of one task can potentially, maybe the way it did for me, fuel you in the way that you go forward. So hopefully that personal update is going to give you a bit of inspiration. I do know Maddie asked about my experience with Ingramspark. So what I'm doing is the print book I'm doing from Draft to Digital print, and that's for the trade paperback. And I'm doing the hardcover versions casebound, in this case, at least minimum casebound. I may do the cover jacket flap. We'll see how the casebound comes back. And I'm doing the reason I'm doing the hardcover is I want there to be a more appealing version for libraries, because hardcovers last 4 times longer than a paperback, and libraries may be more likely to order. And yeah, even though this time around is only a 10,000 word short story, and the novella Stowaway is 20,000 odd words, I want there to be a consistent look and feel. So if they ordered all 4 of the books, for example, they could have the 4 books from the Canadian Werewolf, even though 2 of them are going to be thinner, the other 2 will be full-length novels. But again, it has that complete set. I can potentially also use that for rabid fans and stuff like that to send thank yous off to people. So anyways, that's it for my personal update and the opening stuff for this podcast. Why don't we just get right into this fascinating conversation with Robert J. Sawyer. Hey, Rob, thanks for joining me here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me back.
So there's so many things to talk about, but first, for folks who may not be familiar with Robert J. Sawyer, who is Robert J. Sawyer?
So I'm a Canadian science fiction writer based just outside of Toronto in Mississauga. I've been at this game of publishing for 40 years. Sold my first short story in 1980, and my first novel came out 30 years ago in 1990. I've been published. They've consolidated over the time I've been in the career. There are now 5 big traditional publishing houses left in New York. I've been published by 4 of the big 5. And I have now been, for a number of years, doing my backlist in ebook editions with me doing it entirely. And we'll talk about my hybrid publishing plans, I'm sure, for my current novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative.
That's fantastic. So before we get into the Oppenheimer Alternative, your previous novel was also somewhat hybrid, right? Quantum Night came out was that 2-3 years ago?
4
years ago. Wow.
Took me forever to write the new one, The Oppenheimer Alternative. Quantum Night, what exactly? So it was split, the rights pie was split 3 ways. I gave Ace Science Fiction, who had been my science fiction publisher for many of my books. They'd been my publisher in the early 90s, and they were my publisher again in the from 2009 until my most recent book. I gave them US rights. In Canada, I had a separate deal with Penguin Random House Canada, and then I kept the world rights, and so launched the book as a self-published ebook in the UK, Australia, and everywhere. No translated editions self-published. There are commercially published translated editions in various markets that I did. I control the translation rights, but they were published by commercial publishers. But I did do the foreign rights in English myself worldwide, except Canada and the US.
So what did you learn? Because I mean, you have long been, since I've known you, a traditionally published author making a healthy living from traditional publishing, from advances, and obviously pretty much every international award that a science fiction writer could earn. I think you've probably...
I've been very lucky. Hugo Award, Nebula Award. Yes, I've been very lucky.
And so what did you learn from that experience in the splitting of rights? I know you've split rights before traditionally.
Sure.
But this one time you actually took the reins and you controlled some of the publishing.
Right. Now we're talking about my most recent book, The Oppenheimer Alternative.
Well, no, I think what I want to do is
make Quantum Night and transition.
It's almost like you dipped your toe, right?
Yeah, I dipped my toe. And what I learned was so much of what is supposedly, and I don't mean to disparage anybody I've ever worked with, but so much of what is supposedly the science or the art or the business of commercial publishing is really seat of the pants stuff. I had gone through a circumstance with that book, Quantum Night, where I had done all sorts of testing of titles on Facebook, for instance. And overwhelmingly, the right title for that book, and I'm convinced to this day, the right title for that book was The Philosopher's Zombie, apostrophe S, Philosopher's Possessor.
Yes, I remember that was the working title for a long time.
Absolutely. And it was the hit on Facebook. Everybody liked it. It's a term out of philosophy of mind and neuroscience, refers to somebody who has no inner life. And I brought the results to my American publisher and said, look, I've tested all these titles. We've had, people vote, and I've got 12,000 friends and followers on Facebook. So we had well over 500 or 600 votes cast. I said, well, here are the votes. And my editor said, well, you can't really go by what people say they want to buy. And I thought, yes, you can. It's market research. But publishers do almost none, particularly in genre fiction. They just assume if they can give you the right sort of look on the cover so that people will know, it's space opera. Oh, it's set in the present day or near future. It's steampunk. Oh, it's cyberpunk. Oh, get you into that subgenre. The book will find its audience without any other push. And I realized this is nuts. I went along with the Quantum Night title we ultimately accepted for that book and used it even on my own editions. But I thought, no, I've got to have way more control here. My parents were both statisticians at the University of Toronto professionally. And I know all about data. I know how to ask a question in an unbiased way so that you get the respondent's answer, not the answer the respondent thinks that you want. And it just stunned me that time and again, or at the very last minute, my publisher would come to me and say, we've got to change for whatever reason. The Salesforce didn't like, we've got to change the quote we're using on the front cover of the book. Can you get us a new one in 4 hours? And, these are like the principal sales tools of a book. One of them is what's on the cover of the damn book. And to have it come down to being a rush job at the last minute because of the caprice of some guy at a sales conference, I wanted to control it much, much more. And that's why I did it differently with the next one.
Okay, cool. So let's get into that. So there was a time period as you were working on this project that you were taking your learnings from Quantum Night and applying that to the sale, because you did sell some of the rights and you retained some of the other rights. How did you decide that? Did you work with an agent on that? How was that process?
Now we're talking in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. When I made this deal, nobody had ever heard of COVID-19. So at the time, I felt it was very important to be in traditional brick and mortar bookstores.
Right.
Now, there was a hard and fast date I wanted my book out for. I wanted it out in advance of, but not far in advance of, July 16th, 2020. We actually settled on June 2nd, 2020, because July 16th was the 75th anniversary of the world's first atomic explosion, the Trinity test at Alamogordo, New Mexico. And August 6th is the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. August 9th, the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. My book is called The Oppenheimer Alternative, and it's an alternate history about the Manhattan Project. I knew there would be all kinds of opportunities for promotion, but it had to be in bookstores, I thought. Well, so I said, okay, there's no doubt you can do lovely print-on-demand physical editions that in many ways look better than what my publisher, particularly Tor, one of my big US publishers, has done in the print-on-demand space. But you want to get the damn thing in bookstores. It seemed the only way to do that was with traditional publishers. Now, that said, in Canada, I'm kind of the 800-pound gorilla. I'm a national top 10 bestseller. I've won all the Canadian science fiction awards, far more than anybody else has, the Aurora. I'm a member of the Order of Canada, the highest honor given by my government. So I knew that in Canada, at least, I could find a publisher with a sterling literary reputation that would have good bookstore distribution and maybe even give me a literary cachet that perhaps being imported as a genre title from an American science fiction publisher wouldn't have given me. So I cut a deal with Fitzhenry and Whiteside here in Canada. And in the United States, I was approached by a genre publisher known, they usually do their business under the name Arc Manor. But they were starting a new imprint, Kazik, C-A-E-Z or Z-I-K, which is a concatenation of the names of the family members of the publisher, Kazik. And they had secured the rights for a previously unpublished Robert A. Heinlein novel, the Dean of American Science Fiction. And they had secured, by the strength of having that, Ingram as their bookstore distributor. And they said, how would you like to be our second title following on the footsteps of Heinlein? And I said, okay, just the United States though. And the same thing I said in Canada, where I'd said just Canada, and just print. You don't get audiobooks, you don't get ebooks, you don't get translation rights, and you certainly don't get a piece of film or TV action. I control all of that. And
since you've had lots of experience in film and TV action.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. Flash forward, the ABC TV series based on my novel of the same name. Always have a bunch of novels under option. The option was just renewed last week on Wake, Watch, and Wonder for the third year by the producer who's been developing that as a TV series. So yeah, I know what I'm doing in these areas.
Right.
And I saw no reason to split revenues, especially ebook revenues, with a print publisher, where the standard in the industry, as you know, Mark, is for the ebook, for a print publisher, traditional print publisher, Big Five, to give you 25% of net proceeds. Net proceeds are 70%.
That's if you're a big name like Robert J. Sawyer. Most of the rest of us get 8 to 10%.
Well, all right. It's terrible, right? Okay, 25 is what but it is the ceiling that, unless you're the Stephen King caliber, that you can get. And 25% of 70% is 17.5% of whatever the customer paid. Well, you could argue, and print publishers have for decades, that they do an awful lot in typesetting a book. They do an awful lot in editing a book. They do an awful lot in advertising and promoting a book and physically distributing it as it used to be to, 10,000 independent bookstore accounts in North America? Well, it isn't 10,000 anymore. It's hardly any that they have to distribute to anymore. Most of their sales are to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Chapters Indigo in Canada. They do no advertising. Locus, the trade journal of the science fiction field, used to be the place where every publisher advertised their new releases, and only Tor does it anymore. None of the other big five, Tor's with part of Macmillan, one of the big five, none of the others do it anymore. No promotion. It's been ages since anybody's gotten a book tour in genre fiction publishing out of a US publisher, except for super duper star cases. So they're not doing very much. And for uploading to the Kindle or Kobo or Nook servers, the Apple Book servers, they think they brought 3/4 of the effort to the project. I got a thumb too, a finger, an index finger. I can push enter just as easily as anybody else. So the answer was no effing way that I was going to give up literally the lion's share, 3/4 of ebook revenues. And yes, you well know, if you self-publish, big name, small name, it doesn't matter. Through Kindle Direct Publishing, Kobo Writing Life, or the Smashwords, or a draft to digital, your share is 70% of whatever the customer pays. I'm fine with that. I'm cool. I don't mind the aggregator deserves something, right? Amazon, their storefront brings value to me. I'm not sure a print publisher as an intermediary brings value to me when I'm publishing ebooks.
So you set up, so this was negotiated with the release date of early June?
June 2nd was the date we picked, which just happened to be Tuesday, which is the date that those two publishers happened to drop their monthly releases, happened to be the first Tuesday of the month. I wasn't fussy about what day. I just wanted at least a solid month to allow for, well, I thought for any supply chain interruptions, right?
Right, yes.
At which the supply chain said, hold my beer, and showed me that it could shut down the whole economy, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, the bookstores were closed on June 2nd, right. Most of them. Some of the independents, I live in Toronto, we got a great science fiction independent back at Phoenix. They were offering curbside pickup. You could order off their website and drive by, and somebody would come out and hand you a book.
It's exactly how I got it here in Waterloo, Ontario, from Wordsworth Books.
From Wordsworth, a wonderful independent, right? And I always say to everybody, if you're going to buy print, buy independent. We need those guys. We need those guys desperately. So I lost out on pretty much anything. And I'll tell you, not to kvetch, but the Canadian publisher owes me the on-publication advance. It's been 2 months now since the book came out and on publication. They owe me,
COVID delays.
Well, this is it. I haven't complained. I haven't said a word. Right. I haven't sicked my agent on them. I said, okay, look, everybody is hurting right now. And I'm lucky enough that I have a cushion in my life. I did have a TV series I have done successfully. I live in a lovely, I got a lovely place. I'm not desperate to get that advance. And if they have limited funds right now to pay authors, I want it. I'm not forgiving it, but I'm saying pay the guys who are having trouble meeting their rent first. Right.
But that was like an advance on the Canadian edition. Then there was an advance on the American edition.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that one.
Oh, either.
No, you know what? Actually, forgive me. I've done a bad deed because I did negotiate in advance with Shahid Mahmood, the publisher of Kasich Books. And then after we'd gone back and forth, my agent negotiated. I did use my literary agent. I use them for print. I use them for audiobooks. I use them for foreign editions. And he's very good at all those things.
Excellent.
Kasich, we came up to an amount. We pushed and got to an amount where they're saying, we just can't do anymore. And then I kind of, and maybe even blindsided my agent a little bit and said, okay, but how about this? How about I take no advance, but you don't get ebook rights? And that, because it's hard to get that deal where you keep, right? And I knew if I'd started the negotiation at that level with a US publisher, it would never fly. But with saying to them, and now, okay, you owe me a big amount of money on signing, and it's 6 months later, it's going to be on publication. This is a fairly late in the game deal. Or you can wait until the book starts earning royalties to start paying me. And they jumped at that chance. They jumped at the chance.
And so Amazon, as the world's biggest bookstore in the U.S. market with a monopoly on the U.S. ebook market.
They really do.
Realistically, you getting that 70% on the ebook sales, I'm at what point have you surpassed what the negotiated
have.
advance was? Yeah.
It took 2 months. It took 2 months to surpass
Okay.
in ebook
And
sales.
now it's gravy.
And now it's gravy. And I feel, in some ways, I feel bad for my print publisher. My American edition has a different cover. It's beautiful. It's not in a lot of bookstores. It's starting to dribble in now,
Right.
to bookstores.
Yeah.
But it's not obviously getting the print sales that my publisher had hoped for.
Of course, because that was not anticipated. This would have been commemorative 75th anniversary, still, coming up. It's past the 16th, but 75 years from Hiroshima.
That's right. And,
coming up.
For sure. We were all hoping for a significant boost of sales. Now, the same thing has hurt my publisher's Heinlein book, right? The one they did before me. Bookstores just shut down. Well, it's a tough time to be in the print book business, which is why I'm happy to also be in the ebook business. I service the markets outside Canada and the US in print through print on demand, through Kindle Direct Publishing,
right.
Which meant that it was always available in print everywhere worldwide through Amazon. And, if you happen to order it in Canada, the United States, you got the print editions from the print publishers. Anywhere else, you got my edition, which uses the same Avery Olive cover art that I have on the.
So that's the same one is used on your edition.
That's right. That's right.
Press?
Yeah,
okay.
I loved the cover art.
All right.
I was the one who got Red Deer hooked up with Avery Olive at Bibliofic Designs in Red Deer, Alberta. I said, because they were dragging their heels, and then they sent some, and Sharon Fitzhenry, the publisher, Fitzhenry and Whiteside, knows that I feel this way, some garbage designs. And I said, look, if you don't know how to package this book, well, I kind of do. I kind of know who the Rob Sawyer reader is after 30 years.
Right.
I know what class looks like, and I know how contemporary literary mainstream fiction is published in Canada. You just have to look at this and you compare it to the cover, say, of the current Canadian edition of The Handmaid's Tale, which is also a silhouette, and the sequel, The Testaments, also a silhouette of, Offred, the character. Yeah. But this kind of very stylized graphic arts, as opposed to photorealistic, the American cover photorealistic painting of Oppenheimer, was, appropriate. I shouldn't have to walk a publisher through those details, but if it has to be done, I did. And we got this cover, and because it was perfect, I licensed it separately for my worldwide editions.
Excellent. So I want to get into a little bit of that, because I know one of the things that you do incredibly well is the research, because of the science. Now, in this particular case, it's not just the physics, the science, it's the people.
Yes.
Right? The dramatis personae are real people, but you're taking an alternate history. How different was that for you as a science fiction writer to apply that?
So first, I have to say, not just as a writer who is making money through the ebook marketplace, but as a writer who is very, very research driven, ebooks have been my friend in doing research. I bought, and I'm a well-to-do writer. I can afford to spend money, and I do. I never pirate a book. I mean, no writer ever should, right? I happen to be a Kobo partisan, so I bought through Kobo over 100 different ebooks editions, over 100 of books about the Manhattan Project, the characters involved. So biographies of Robert Oppenheimer, biographies of Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, Hans Bethe, Enrico Fermi, Werner von Braun, all the characters I used, Harry S. Truman, all the characters I used in the book and so forth, the various issues of science. And then this is the part that Kobo and nobody else wants to hear. I dispensed with the DRM, used Calibre to knock them all down to plain text, and threw them into a full text searchable plain text database.
Of course, you needed that. Right?
I needed that.
You paid for
I paid for the books. Yeah. I'm using them. And it's actually, I believe, fully legal under Canadian copyright law for the original licensee to do whatever he wants. He just can't share it. So I did that. And then, if I wanted to find Oppenheimer's mother's name, if it was eluding my brain, it's 2 seconds. If you have a good database and a good database search engine for finding the material. I happen to be a WordStar for DOS diehard, but WordStar for DOS actually came with a spectacularly good plain text search engine database called ProFinder. And I use that as the way to search all these books. And I could find all the various points of view on a given issue. Here's what General Groves said in his biography, and here's what Oppenheimer said, which is completely opposite, and it made the research much, much more easy. Now, that said, in addition to those 100 electronic texts, not everything is available as an ebook these days. And in fact, a lot of the stuff about the Manhattan Project, it was 75 years ago after all, is long out of print. So my number 2 friend was ABE.com.
Of course.
Used to be called Advanced Book Exchange, based in British Columbia, now owned by Amazon. But they're the world's biggest searchable database. What they are is, for those who don't know, I know you know, is an aggregator of little independent antiquarian booksellers, where all these independents worldwide can list their stock, but they're all listed at one place, ABE. So you can go and say, I want Now It Can Be Told by General Leslie R. Groves, published in 1962. That's a bad example because it is available as an ebook.
Right.
Well worth get it.
But it was tough.
But if it weren't, ABE would show me everybody who's got them. Of course, they're all used at this point. Some are ex libris, that is former library ones. They'll tell you if it has, a library card pocket in it, and from excellent condition down to just a readable copy, whatever it is. But that also electronic research. So even, as a print book buyer, the World Wide Web has made it possible to buy your print books, of course, from a big conglomerate. The savvy independents also have online ordering. Back of Phoenix, I mentioned before, does indeed. And for finding antiquarian books, you don't have to necessarily go into a musty bookshop on the off chance that they might have the rare title you're looking for. I got about half of my books from ABE were from booksellers, not in Canada or the United States. They were from the UK, where a lot of those books had more recently been in print still. And so the book may have fallen out of print in the 60s in North America, but the UK editions were kicking around until the 80s, say,
Wow.
for some of these historic texts, and are still available in, very good or near fine condition.
So I'm curious now because you had to get into Oppenheimer's head. There's a lot of dialogue. Is that dialogue from all of these various accounts
Yes.
and biographies? And
So the particulars of this historical period is that it was setting, this project was the most secret project humanity had ever undertaken to that point. And as far as we know, who knows what's going on, as far as we know, the most secret one ever undertaken, which meant that there was an awful lot of bugging and recording, clandestine recording. They were, the United States military and the FBI separately, were paranoid that Oppenheimer, because of his past, his wife was a member of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
His brother was a member of the Communist Party. Oppie claimed he himself had never been a member, but here's a term you don't hear anymore, but everybody knew this term 50, 60, 70 years ago, a fellow traveler, which meant somebody who was sympathetic to communist ideals but hadn't joined the party. Who, we share and put in as socialist principles and communist principles, each according to his needs takes, each according to his ability gives. It sounds good at first blush, right? Never has worked once in the real world, but it sounds good at first blush. So Oppie was a suspicious character as far as both the military and the FBI was concerned. So an awful lot of his private life was recorded, and that was classified at the time. But it's 75 years on now. Most of it, although not all, most of it has been declassified. And so you can get those transcripts. And I would say, maybe 20% of the dialogue in my novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative, is verbatim. And the rest of it, I had the benefit of having read hundreds of pages of these characters in transcript. And even when I was making up scenes or dramatizing scenes that didn't happen to have been recorded, I had read so much of their voice, whether it was Oppenheimer or Edward Teller or General Groves, that I knew I could nail them. Just right now, Chris Wallace, I'm not the only guy who's cashing in on the 75th anniversary. Fox News correspondent Chris Wallace has a nonfiction book out called Countdown 1945, right? Written by him with, and in little tag underneath, with the guy who probably really wrote the book, right? That's how these things work.
With Robert J. Sawyer.
And it was not me, because I would have gotten it right. But they have a scene early in the book where General Groves is described as going on a profanity-filled tirade. Now, anybody who knew General Groves, who was a parson's son, will tell you, a chaplain's son, will tell you he never swore. He never swore. He would get angry. There's no question about that. He had a temper, but swearing was something that he'd been brought up never to do. As a novelist, that was irresistible. You want to be the guy who writes the one time in the character's life where he's pushed to swear, so angry that he breaks his own rule. That's a great moment for me as a novelist, and I got to use it in the Oppenheimer Alternative. But for Chris Wallace's book, what he must have read was that, in some historical account, General Groves blew up over this. Well, you don't want to be charged with plagiarism. Yeah. So you see, and you make up a detail that isn't accurate. And this is why so many, I learned this years ago, as I used to be a freelance journalist, but secondary sources can never be trusted. You got to go back to the primary. You can't say, this is what so-and-so said about what he read about so-and-so. Right. The most famous example in my own little field is there used to be a huge fight over whether our field should be called, for short form, science fiction should be SF or sci-fi. And sci-fi was a pun on hi-fi, high fidelity stereo equipment. And people thought that was demeaning and dismissive. And then it came out, this guy wrote 20 years ago, Heinlein used sci-fi. And he claimed it, right, and published it in a book. Well, a couple of years ago, somebody was doing research and went to the Heinlein archives and got the original piece of correspondence. And Heinlein had used the abbreviation sci-fic, not sci-fi, right? So the whole credibility, now we gave up this fight when the Sci-Fi Channel emerged. At that point, it was a lost battle. Right. But the point is, these secondary sources, whether it's the Chris Wallace novel, Chris Wallace putatively nonfiction that's out now, or this guy who was contending that it was Heinlein who had coined the term sci-fi, secondary sources are very often wrong. And I like to think, so far, nobody has found a single error in the Oppenheimer Alternative, except one that's 100% my fault, where I decided to have the speed of light mentioned in miles per hour instead of miles per second. And every sci-fi buff knows that's 186,282 miles per second. And I just did my math wrong, converting it. It's 700 million miles per hour, 680 million something. And I didn't pick up on that. In a brain fart, I put 700,000 miles per hour, which is way too slow. It's 1,000 times too slow. And I had physicists, Dr. Gregory Benford amongst them, Andrei Bormanis, the science advisor for Star Trek, Lee Smolin, formerly of the Perimeter Institute, and still with the Perimeter Institute, formerly with the Institute for Advanced Study. Great physicists, read the book in manuscript. None of them picked it up. Within 24 hours of the book being published, of course, Joe Reeder is writing to me and saying, Sawyer, you ain't as bright as you think you are.
But you could fix that in the EPUB immediately.
Absolutely. That's right.
And in your print edition. What's that?
And I will.
Yeah.
My rule is this. You don't jump through every hoop that's thrown in front of you. Right. I felt it was appropriate, unless there was something that was egregious to the point of libelous.
Like
Or
maybe he's wearing the wrong hat in one scene.
that's okay too. If he's not, but that would be okay. But if I had accidentally said something libelous, you want to correct that. You have an obligation legally to mitigate the damages immediately.
Right.
Or if I had said something, if I had used the wrong word, and so the meaning was the exact opposite of what I intended, and so the story no longer makes sense, you go in immediately. But my normal rule is, even in print, I always sent in a bunch of corrections for the paperback. That was a year after the hardcover.
Right.
So in print, I waited 9 months after hardcover to say to the publisher, and here are the corrections for the paperback, because they all come in by now.
Yeah, that way you have a batch of them. You can.
That's right.
Yeah, that
And you do it all at once, because people on Kindle, they get notified that there's an updated edition. You don't want to hassle people, right, for a triviality. Right. So I decided I'm going to wait 90 days to just after Labor Day.
Okay.
And by that point, do an updated, across the board of all the editions.
So speaking of other editions, I want to get into the audiobook edition because I know that was separate rights. But before we go there, because I'm sure people are curious listening to this. So this is true history. And then it does the classic. Now I think of my classic Robert J. Sawyer is near real time, where you speculate, what if the CERN collided?
Yes.
What if this happened? Right? Like it's just so near. Now you've gone back 75 years and said, well, at what point did the history and the alternative history diverge?
Right. It is an alternate history novel, or I like to call it a secret history novel. An alternate history novel is a counterfactual that anybody who knows a modicum of history can say, yeah, that never happened that way. The classic example is Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, in which the Axis powers, Japan and Germany, instead of the Allied powers, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, and so forth, won World War II. Well, everybody knows that's not the world we live in. I wanted to write a secret history where, as far as we know, there's nothing in the Oppenheimer Alternative that is contradicted by what we publicly know, but about something happening behind the scenes, because there were provocative hints in the novel, not in the novel, in real life, that something was going on behind the scenes. Prior to him being stripped of his security clearance, which Oppenheimer was in the early 50s, for those communist associations that we spoke about earlier, he said to a journalist, if a reporter were to dig deeply enough, he would discover that this is a much bigger story than just my security suspension. When they cut off Oppenheimer from all atomic secret information, it was General Dwight Eisenhower by that point, Deke Parsons, who was Oppie's second in command at Los Alamos, said this exact quote, this is the worst mistake the United States could make. I have to tell Ike, not Ike meaning General Eisenhower, the president, not to do this. Unfortunately for Oppenheimer, and even more unfortunately for Deke Parsons, Deke had a heart attack the next day and died before he got in to see Eisenhower. But these provocative hints that there was some kind of huge story in the background really appealed to me. And I started looking into trying to find a science fictional story, because that's my field. And Hans Bethe won a Nobel Prize for determining how the sun generates its energy. And he published a seminal paper in 1938 that led to him getting the Nobel. Some years later, there's always a period of reflection before you get that prize. But he was wrong. What's amazing is you look at the paper now and he says, no, he's got the sun 5 million degrees hotter than it really is. It's 15 million degrees, and he's got it at 20 million degrees. And well, that ain't right. It just ain't that hot. And I thought, well, what if it was? What if he didn't make a mistake? What if when he made those measurements in 1938, the sun was hotter for a brief period of time? What would the after effects of that be? And I came up with a science fictional plot line involving the fact that before the war, Oppenheimer was an astrophysicist. We remember him as an atomic physicist, but that wasn't his line of work before the war, and tie it all together into this package that nobody can easily gainsay. You can't look at it and say, but that never happened. No, everything that is publicly in the record in my novel really publicly happened.
Oh, that is awesome.
It was a great intellectual challenge for me. And after 23 books and after 23 novels and after over 60 awards for my writing and being 60 years old now, I don't need to do anything I don't want to do. It had to be a challenge to be worth doing. Otherwise, what's the point at this point?
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that people listening are like, okay, now I can sink my teeth into this understanding. So going back to the rights again, so the audio, so I think it's recorded audio. Is that who's
so recorded books, which is now I guess called recorded media. They changed their name. One of the oldest and most venerable audiobook suppliers, way before there was an Audible, one of the companies that served particularly the library market with books on cassette, was Recorded Books. And going way back to 1996, they had been one of my publishers. They did The Terminal Experiment, an unabridged audiobook on, I don't know, a dozen audio cassettes or something like that. And I still have, copies of that. I've listened to that version for ages. And you'll see a lot of older science fiction and mystery and just popular literature. On Audible, you'll see actually the suppliers Recorded Books. When Audible was starting up, Recorded Books went and digitized all their content and started selling it through Audible. And I had a couple of publishers who were interested in doing the audiobook version. One who wasn't offering in advance, but had some really attractive terms. And the other was Recorded Books, who was offering in advance. And because I'd done several titles with Recorded Books before, I thought, the terms were maybe a little better for the other guys, but by which I mean per copy royalties and so forth, but per download royalties. But Recorded Books, A, was offering a sizable advance, and B, does sell books to public libraries, audiobooks still on physical media, CDs now, right? Audio compact discs, but they're still sold. And that's still a real market that generates real money. So I decided to go with them. And the only glitch we had in bringing my book to market turned out to be with Recorded Books, because we picked a drop date. And I said to the American and Canadian publishers, I don't care what date you decide between the two of you, but you have to decide on the same date, because publicity is worldwide these days. I do this blog with you, or this vlog. I do somebody else's blog, John Scalzi's blog, which I did, his blog. I did a big ideas piece. These things drop when they drop, and they're visible worldwide. You can't say, oh yeah, it's out in the States, but you got to wait 3 weeks to find it in Canada. 3 weeks later, nobody remembers you or your book. You got to have everything out the same day. And Recorded Books promised up and down that they would. Well, COVID-19 is a medical crisis, and one of the people involved with the production got the disease. And we missed the pub date by almost 3 weeks for the audio version. And that hurt not just the audio sales, it hurt the Kindle ebook sales. Now, why would that be a factor? Because Kindle has their Whisper Sync feature where you can have the book read in Audible and you're reading it on Kindle and bounce seamlessly back and forth. And they offer a bundle price normally, where you get the two books at two formats at a bundle price, a reduced cost. Well, that wasn't available on day one. And so I lost out on some sales. So this, besides being wrecked up by no bookstores being open when my book came out, that actually cost me money.
And I probably would have bought the audio. I bought the Kobo version. I bought the paperback. I probably would have bought the audio because I'm a slow reader. I would have been able to listen to it. And
in the end, we have a wonderful audiobook, and Josh Bloomberg is the narrator. And for little bits of flavor, I have my characters drop the odd phrase in their native tongue, which might be Italian or German or French or Hungarian. Well, Josh is a foreign language specialist and also an accent specialist. So he could do all the Manhattan Project was a melting pot of refugee scientists from Europe, Enrico Fermi from Italy, Hans, Beta, from wherever the heck Hounds was from. I'm not remembering. Strasbourg's where Hounds from. And so on and so forth. Edward Teller from Hungary. Leo Szilard, also from Hungary, and so on and so forth. So we needed the right guy, and we had the right guy in Joshua. It's a great production, but this damn disease has been a huge impediment.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the other thing too, is you often do a lot of in-person. I mean, you would have probably between, more so than I, between March and now, I think I've only canceled 6 trips, maybe 7 trips.
Yes.
We would have had that in a month.
Well, and here, you and I live in Canada, as you know. Our federal minister of transportation, who I was cheering on because he's an astronaut, only country on the planet who has a minister of transportation who is an astronaut, Mark Garneau, has allowed our airlines, our national airlines, to not refund the money that people had spent booking flights, right? Instead, they're keeping it as flight credits. I want my damn money back because I booked a book tour for the whole month of June. I'm with 2 smallish publishers. They were happy to cooperate on publicity, but I said to them both, look, I've got some frequent flyer miles, and I have some money. And I know how to stretch $1 on book tour like nobody's business. I know, I've got friends in every city in North America that I can crash with. I don't need to fly first class. I'm happy with, fast food takeout on the road. I can make this work. And I booked across Canada, down into Pacific Northwest, the University Bookstore in Seattle and so forth, Powell's, World of Books, and right down into San Diego. And all of that got canceled because the stores weren't open. I got a ton of flight credits now.
Yeah, that's lots of travel to happen when it happens in 2 years maybe.
Yes, but I have to have a new project, right? You can't go and tour for something old. I'm not. It's not like being a musician where you can go and do the 10th anniversary tour of the release of Jagged Little Pill if you're Alanis Morissette, another Canadian. Right? Nobody wants the 10th anniversary book tour and nobody even wants J.K. Rowling anymore, right? It's like my window of opportunity to promote this book will be over next week, as you and I record this, August 9th. 6th is the Hiroshima bombing, August 9th is the Nagasaki bombing, and then it'll be another 25 years.
Before it's like an anniversary.
100th anniversary, the centenary of the birth of the atomic age.
So you mentioned you're 60. You have had, that many novels published, won every major science fiction award, international awards from countries. Very few writers in history have had that honor.
Yeah, top SF awards in France, in China, 3 times in Japan, and 3 times in Spain. So, as well as the top American award and the top Canadian award.
So you get to kind of do what you want. And what, and I know you have a Patreon account so that those who want Rob Sawyer and can get like personalized Rob Sawyer stuff in advance of publication or behind the scenes access to your stuff. You've got fans that will do that for you. But what's the sort of next thing? Do you already have that on your radar, or are you just still...
Yeah, so I had been just doing a ton of reading, just following my nose curiosity-wise wherever it led me. And then I got actually approached by Audible, who wants to get more heavily into original audio drama content. And they approached me, actually, before Oppenheimer Alternative came out. They approached me 14 months ago. And there was lots of back and forth and lots of changes at Audible's head office. But finally, Friday, we're talking on a Monday, so the previous business day, the final version, I think, of the contract from Audible went to my agent. And we'd gone back and forth, and in kind of the final Hail Mary, where we said, Rob's not going to do this. They came up with 40% more on the advance. And I thought, I guess I got to do it. Because the money had gotten into the territory where, most authors would consider it stratospheric.
And it's
so,
well worth it, right?
but this was the sticking point, right? I said, I'll do that. But, you want 10 half-hour radio dramas. That is 10 and a half hours, essentially, of spoken word. That's about 50,000 words of material. If I'm going to write that much, I'm going to continue and make a novel out of it. And I want to 100% own that intellectual property. You can have the short version as an audio drama, but
right.
there is going to, like all likelihood, be a novel length, longer, more in-depth, more complex version. And I want, that you get a piece of that action. And Audible, of course, we go back and forth on whether or not they do, right? And ultimately, we came to terms that I was happy with and they were happy with. But this will turn out to be my 25th novel.
Sweet, that is fantastic, and I love the fact that you kind of. I mean, I know you're finally getting to the final contract with the agent, but that was something that was in process before this novel even came out.
Yes, they, and in fact, we had agreed on a different property 14 months ago. And I came along and finally my interest had changed. I said to them, I got to ask a tough question. We were in a video conference. Do you love that property or do you love the idea of being in business with Robert J. Sawyer? And they said immediately the latter. And I said, then forget that piece of, I created it, right? I said, forget that piece of crap. I'm no longer interested in it. I want to do something completely different. The world has changed, right? This is now post-COVID. I want to do something completely different. And they said, oh, what? And I said, boom, boom, boom. And they said, great. All right, let's do it. So I'm actually, this is the fruit of all the last several months of my following my nose and doing research. And it's going to be a really good project. You mentioned I do have a Patreon. And on my Patreon account, my patrons will be getting to see the drafts as I write them. Awesome. And I'll be, springboarding, brainstorming and ideas and so forth. And it should be quite a good ride. It certainly was for the last 4 years with my Patreons as I wrote the Oppenheimer Alternative. They were very much involved seeing behind the scenes and beta reading the novel and providing commentary and feedback on drafts of cover art and so forth.
And it seems very applicable that radio was where you spent a long time before you were a writer.
This is it. It's one of the, now they've come to me as a writer, but they already, the producer is here in Toronto that I'll be working with. And I worked with him decades ago at CBC Radio. And this was exactly the point, is that when Audible started looking around, it was actually Audible Canada, for things they could do up in this country. Immediately my name was put forward as a guy who A, has a big literary reputation, and B, is a trained broadcaster, member of the Writers Guild of Canada, the Script Writing Union and so forth, and trained in radio and television arts at Ryerson. It just seemed that I was the natural person for this project.
Oh, for sure. That is fantastic. Well, Rob, I want to thank you so much for spending the time with me, sharing so many fascinating insights. Can you please let my listeners know where they can find out more about Robert J. Sawyer?
Absolutely. You just said my name, Robert J. Sawyer. Take out the spaces and the punctuation, and you've got Robert J. Sawyer. And that's where you'll find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Patreon. But my website, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year, the oldest science fiction author website in the world, is at sfwriter.com. S is in science, F is in fiction, writer.com, which answers where I stood on that SF versus sci-fi debate we alluded to earlier in the conversation.
Quite brilliantly, Rob. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, Mark. Be well, my friend. Cheers.
I just wanted to pause and take a look at someone like Rob, who has been in the publishing industry for a long, long time. First short story sold in 1980, first novel out in 1990. And Rob had long made a full-time living as a writer, full-time writer, traditionally publishing. And this is back when advances were giant and lots of great things going on, and many sales and awards and all the brilliant things that were going on. But I love how Rob is using and leveraging his understanding of the business of writing and publishing with the IP splitting, and a longtime person in the industry, having worked with agents and split rights from Canada, US, and international rights, recognizing he has a global audience, and then being able to experiment with different rights on print in this market versus ebook and that market, and knowing that he has the power to control that, through Kindle Direct Publishing, through Kobo Writing Life, through Draft to Digital, where you can easily manage rights splits as an author or publisher, and even the different methodologies. So a lot of strategies and a lot of things that I hear about in the industry are, well, you have to publish fast and you have to write 4 books a year, and if you want to make a living as a full-time writer, you have to do that. Well, no, not necessarily. Rob is a perfect example. He released his latest novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative, just came out in June of this year. And as we mentioned in the podcast, 4 years ago, 4 years between novels. Now, a lot of people in the indie community would think, oh my God, my career is over. It's been 4 years since I published a book. Obviously, with this is his 24th novel, with the other 23 novels, and not to mention that he has short story collections and other streams of revenue, but most of Rob's streams of revenue don't come from anything other than his IP, his intellectual property, which is directly related to being a science fiction writer. He doesn't have courses and other things like that where he's making money. Yeah, he gets paid as a speaker because he is a very good professional speaker, and so he does get paid speaking gigs, but the majority of his money is coming in from royalties, and this is royalties off of books, but it's also the options he has sold to multiple options over the years, and renewed options on movies and television programs and stuff like that. So he's really leveraging his IP, and I love the new project he's talking about, going in with that sort of radio drama, which is sort of a wonderful throwback to when he got started. He was in radio before he became a full-time writer, and so I love that, and he mentions, he goes, I'm at a certain age, I'm at a certain point in my career where I'm just going to do it because it's fun and I want to do it, or it's a challenge, like the way he did this latest novel, where he had to really challenge himself with real people and being accurate about the things that they probably said in this imagined scene based on real dialogue transcripts and research, hundreds of books. So taking a lesson from Rob on the IP splitting, thinking about what are the things you can do with your IP that may be experimental, that may be able to employ. Now, we don't all have the clout to negotiate the way Rob does, but that's okay. It's going to come with people like Rob and people like Mark Dawson and other people who've done this kind of right splitting. And some publishers are going to find some success with it. And it's going to be a good experience. So this may become more commonplace. So I have a second free copy to support my local indie bookstore, Wordsworth Books. I would love to hear from you, the listener, if there are certain things you can do with your IP that maybe you got inspired by listening to Rob in this podcast. What are some of the things that you could employ in terms of thinking about different territories and rights and the stuff that you're creating? You can leave that comment over at starkreflections.ca for episode 145 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is the end of the podcast. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Thanks for joining me in episode 145. I will be back next week with another episode. And so until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.